Well, good afternoon, folks. This old Buster coming to you with another story. I want to tell y'all that I got one coming up here that probably be toward the ends that you might be really interested in on how the Presidential Corps all started. But we'll get to that later. And don't forget to write to Buster and the Boys at yahoo.com for all the information and stories and videos and research and whatnot and pictures. Title of this is The General. Well, Howard was in a sure enough deliberation explaining about this new plane. Now, Mr. Hiram Holmes was a grinning from ear to ear, listening to Howard telling the rest of the boys how it all come about. The boy was in hog heaven, but Walter was just a squirming like a worm in hot ashes, and Buster was a munching on something or t'other, and Jesse was a checking his cell phone and reaching for his laptop computer. Well, Howard said, "Now hold on, boys. Y'all are going to hear this, like it or not, and we is going to tussle right here in this office if and you don't." Now, Howard don't generally say that, but he fitting to be tied here over his new airplane. Now, Howard was right serious, so the boys got to paying attention to what all he was a-saying. Well, Howard just wasn't going to be trifled with when it come to their planes. Any plane, for that matter. Now, Mr. Holmes pulled some mighty big strings along with a bundle the boys put in for this here new airplane. It was one of a kind. She was a Boeing 747-700X, and it was modified. That never got into production, and then she was modified, like I say, because Mr. Holmes and his boys and Howard, Big Mike Young, and some other folks, and you probably don't remember this, Big Mike Young had a boy he was in elementary school with. Old boy finally ended up standing about 6'10". That was Omer Archibald McPherster. That's the one small, this pretty big old gal is dipping Garrett snuff and spitting and cussing all the time. But anyhow, back to what I'm saying, they modified that airplane, so all kinds of little things on it. Well, heck fire, the president didn't even have a plane like this one. She was called a 747-700XM, and she was built under the strictest security. Now, her communication system was state-of-the-art. She carries 4 spare engines and has enough armament for a war. Her defense system and missiles could take out anything known that was a-flying, and her skin would stop armor-piercing bullets. The old gal, I guess it was a guy, because his name's the General, had 6 staterooms and baths and enough cargo space for the boys' toys and vehicles. You know, most of those airships and ships are woman names and things like that. But, like the Belle and the Queen and the Star and all like that the boys' planes had. But this one they called the General. Well, her range was extended to 15,000 miles, and she could be refueled in the air. She was high-tech and built with the newest, best, and some secret materials. Well, Howard told the boys they had to be checked out in the plane and all of her systems that's before they could fly her, and needed to be doing it soon, too, like in the next 3 days. No going home, that's for sure. Had to be checked out in the plane and all of her systems. And do it right and pass muster. Well, not no going home for sure, so get them notions out of your head. Then Howard gave them all a little background, along with Mr. Holmes, adding in his 2 cents worth in the discussion. Now, Dalton was usually with Mr. Holmes most of the time nowadays, as Mr. Holmes was along in the tooth and relied on Dalton for most things dealing with the Presidential Corps. Now, Devane stayed mostly in the field, but it wasn't going to be long, for Mr. Holmes was going to have to step aside and let Dalton run the show. Of course, Mr. Hiram would always have input when it come to the Corps, or the boys for that matter, and Dalton knowed that as well as he knowed the sun was going to come up in the morning. Just wasn't going to be no retirement for that man, no sirree, as long as he had a little old brayer than them cigars he is. Reports was handed out to the boys, and they began to reading them, and Mr. Holmes told them to ask any questions they had. He said he really wanted the boys to know what all this here plane had and what it could do. Now, Mr. Holmes also said there were standing orders for any of the boys to be able to get a military jet or plane at any time they requested one. Now, he made sure of that, seeing how all the scrapes they'd been in. He give them all a special card and a code word for the commanding officer of any base. Then he started telling them all about this plane and what all the things could have and do. Well, after the boys read the report, Hired and Mr. Holmes filled them in on what all the plane had done to her, and that allowed her more takeoff weight, more fuel, and how the engines were juiced. Now, these boys could fly anything they had, but Hired was the one that done that trickster flying. You know, Buster didn't like no loops and things. Now, she would do Mach 1.2 and not even breathe hard. That's about 915 miles an hour, but that depended on if she was flying at sea level. Now, since the speed of sound varies with the density of air or whatever material it is transmitted through, one needs to determine the density of the air the aircraft is flying through to compute the exact speed, but Hired reckoned that was done pretty darn quick, if and he did so himself. Her exterior was a new metal and fabric that was lighter and stronger than anything that was known to be available. Now, folks, I know you say, what's he reading all this stuff about that airplane? A lot of these things I'm telling you about this equipment and what they could do and couldn't do is factual. That's why I'm saying with the pictures and all the research and everything, this is not something I dreamed up out of my mind. Now, sure enough, some of it could be. I don't allow that it's not. But what I'm telling you is gospel, and it can be verified and everything else. So I'm going to finish reading what all. Now, her fuel bladders were made of the same stuff, and all the amenities was also in the plane, such as a picture show, media room, conference room, dining area, galley, restrooms, communal area for cards and whatnot, and guest pods. And each of the boys had a separate office space as well. It was a big one. Wasn't no little plane. Now, she was well appointed, but light as a feather, but tougher than a nickel steak and meaner than a junkyard dog if you got her riled. Now, like I say, they calling it she, but it's really a he, because it's the general. He could convert to carry 100 passengers real comfortable like in the various rooms too. Now, the 747-700XM, which I say is modified, carried them 4 spare engines that weighed 12,822 pounds apiece. Her maximum takeoff weight was 1,200, well, let me correct that, 1,227,000 pounds. So even with all of her special features, she had room to spare. Well, Buster hollered at them to all, let's go eat. Well, everybody knows what that meant. Come hell and high water, Buster's going to get on the feed bag. Well, on the way out the door, Jesse said they ought to head on out to the airfield and get to learning about the old boy. Well, all the boys agreed to that, and Mr. Holmes said he would have Dalton and Devane meet them there in the morning. The base where she was at was a secret military installation in Utah, and they could all leave after dinner if they wanted. Hired said they was building a special hangar and runway for her at their places there, airstrip that they got, that Mr. Holmes provided for, where the rest of their planes was at. She'd be in good company with Belle and Queen and Duchess and Star. Well, as the boys and Mr. Holmes was getting into his limo, Walter asked them what they was going to call her. And like I say, Jesse said that was a good question. Reckoned we need to get deciphering on that. Well, after all the boys was in the air, Buster said to them all that this here new plane wasn't no her, but a him. We's going to call him the General. Well, sir, all the boys was thinking that there was a grand idea there, and all of them agreed to it, was to be the General. Well, Hired also showed the boys the new flight helmets they would be using, courtesy of Mr. Holmes. It was the new F-35 that was modified for flying the General. Now, that helmet you put on was one of them things you see in your mind and your eyes and all. It was really something, which is a true thing, like I told you. Really something else. Your thinking made it work. Well, all the boys were right impressed, as well as Dalton and Devane. Mr. Holmes told all of them that there was even a few more tricks up his sleeve for the General, and he would have the technicians fill them in all that later on. Now, flying the General like he was in a dream, he said. As big as he was, he could do some remarkable things with the power and maneuverability he possessed. It took the boys 3 months for all of them to really get the hang of the General, but they got all the bugs worked out and figured how to operate every doodad the old General had. He was a big, mean, lean, flying machine, that's for sure. And ready for bar, said Walter. Well, the boys decided to take a little trip with the General on a maiden voyage, so to speak. And all the gals were to go with them to Australia to check up on Charlie and Caroline, along with Steve and Sandra June. Butch was up and at 'em and was courting a little school teacher out of Arkansas by the name of Sheena Marie, but Bulldog Henson was still unhitched and still on the lookout for his one and only. Well, all of them thought it'd be a good trip and business needed some tending to along with the long overdue visit to Charlie and Caroline. The boys was going to land there in Perth, Australia, and charter a smaller plane to go on to St. Patrick's Luxury Boutique Hotel. And everybody wanted to see Vivian Porter, who owns the place, and her parents, Dawn and Bill Clancy. Now, Vivian's brother Stephen was still there cooking and would be a sight for sore eyes, too. And the boy could cook, too. He knowed how to make pan-fried taters. But especially Bill. It was quite the adventure the last time the gals seed that feller for sure. Wasn't nothing but to just get on out on the General and take on out to there. And they done just that. Now, it was about 10,825.4 miles from Little Rock, Arkansas to Perth, Australia. Well, that's a long ways, and flying time was about 22 hours and 29 minutes. With all four of the boys flying, it wasn't going to be no strain at all, no step for a stepper. The gals all wanted to begin to learn anything about flying the General too, so the boys began to give them lessons on the controls and gizmos. Walter said he was glad to see that there wasn't nary a feather ruffled or fur flying about teaching them gals flying. Seeing how Buster let Hire teach Lulu, he was out of getting fussed at if he didn't explain everything just right to her liking. I love Lulu to death, Buster says, but she says stop as too, ain't enough information. Just too short for her to be learning on that stuff. Well, it was going so good with Hire to teaching Lulu, the rest of the boys let him teach Monique, Luann, and Alma making. Now, Sandra June got right fitful to trying to figure out flying the General, but she hadn't had the experience of flying as the gals had. Now, Hire had to take it slow like with Sandra June and the little school teacher gal Sheena Marie. Now, Butch was all up in it and was a-having a fit to fly. He done been on a computer and was a-raring to go, but actual flying and computer flying was two different things, you know. But give that boy credit, he was doing pretty dang good for what he knowed. Butch was going to be a darn good pilot, and Buster could see that Butch was going to give Hire a run for his and money. Well, now, Steve wasn't much on flying, but he sure was into taking the General apart and see what made him tick. Steve could fix most about anything and was looking for tools when Bulldog said he just wanted to shoot the guns. He was just looking for something to shoot at. Well, they got into Perth the next morning, on to the hotel about noon. They was sure enough surprising Charlie and Caroline and all the gang at the hotel. Bill said there was a party for sure that night, so get ready. Now, that party was a humdinger, and even William come by with some of his'n folks. It was really good to see everybody and visit for a spell. There was a eating and a drinking and dancing up a storm to boot, way up into the night. Well, the next day the gals all went shopping and the boys met up with Charlie to get caught up on the business and the things there in Australia. Well, Jesse had a pretty dang good idea what all was happening there, but Charlie surprised all the boys with the bottom line 3 times what any of them ever expected. He's a whiz-bang at Charlie now. But now all the boys in their team was richer than who'd have thought it, so money wasn't a thing for them except that they had to have some to keep score. Now all the families was all took real good care of and everybody seemed to be real happy. But now Charlie, Caroline, Steve, and Sandra June, and Butch, and Bulldog was like family. Now all the youngins were getting up to where they could be on their own pretty soon, and some of them was even courting. It was good to see things were turning out as good as it was, said Buster. Whilst everybody was a-visiting, Charlie come out with a real humdinger. He said he reckoned him and Caroline was going to be tied down for a spell. Well, Hire asked Charlie just what that mean. Well, seeing how Caroline's in the family way, Caroline and me is going to be tied up right smart. Well, I declare, said Sandra June. When are you due? Well, Caroline told them all she was expecting about the end of December. Well, Lulu told Caroline and the group that they was going to have a real bundle of joy for Christmas and to give her a hug. Well, now, said Charlie, it's going to be 3 bundles. Triplets? Hollered Alma Bay, and all the gals went to hugging Caroline and began to making plans for baby showers and such. It was going to take hell and high water to keep them women folk from them babies, I tell you. Well, Jesse told Charlie he reckoned they wasn't going to be leaving anytime soon, and it was a good thing they had the general to get around in. Fact is, they was headed on out to China when they left out of Australia. Well, Jesse said he had planned on taking Charlie and Caroline with them, but seeing how the young'uns was coming soon, that was out the question. Well, Buster slapped old Charlie on the back and picked him up and gave him a good bar hug. Buster said to Charlie that he knowed he was keeping himself right busy and something must be in the air or the water won. Well, all of them hooted and hollered over that, and Walter broke out to champagne. After another fortnight in Australia, that's 2 weeks, the boys were ready to hightail it on to China. Buster had the hog-tied bulldog since he done found him a sweet thing and got goofier than a moonbat over that gal. Bulldog done turned Texican on him and had a gal in every town. Well, all the gals swore to get him married up sooner or later, and but they had to give their blessing for the gal first. Well, Butch and Sheen Marie was another thing, though, now. Them women done had wedding bells ringing their ears, and that was all there was to it. Mark my word, said Hired, it won't be long for Butch is married up right proper. Well, Jesse still had his eye on the ball, and accomplishing what he set out to do was still a driving him in business and inventing things. The boys all know the responsibility they had, and they had to try to make the world a better place, and that included working with Mr. Holmes and the security of the USA and the world. The boys had many friends around the world too, and because of Jesse's ties to Zambia and Buster's at Ethiopia, South Africa was always in their plans. The Bahamas and American Indians were sure enough leading the pack, and all the boys was making a better life for them too. Leonard and Thomasina see to that. Now, all the business was in fine feather with Charlie running the show, and the visit done them all real good. The goodbyes was said, and Hired and Walter cranked up the general, and off they went to China. Well, Buster and Jesse was at the controls when it happened. The general just stopped dead in his tracks at 40,000 feet, done right at 502 miles an hour. Danged if and that didn't cause a heck of a stir. Just stopped midair. Wasn't else enough to it. The general was took hold of in one of them Buck Rogers tractor beams and pulled up inside some kind of contraption they ain't never heard the like of. Now this don't beat all, said Walter. Buster, you done got us into another pickle. It ain't me, hollered Buster to Walter. We done been got by something. I got no control. Neither, said Jesse. Reckon we're just going to have to play this on out, boy, said Buster. Get your guns and be quick about it now. Buster said ain't no telling what we all going to be running up again. When the general docked inside this here spacecraft, the boys had the biggest surprise they ever did see. They was met by Mr. Holmes and Julian, and another feller was with them too, by the name of Admiral Hannibal Patton Coulter. Well, everybody was introduced, and boy howdy did the questions begin to fly. Now, Mr. Holmes told all of them to follow him on into a kind of lounge and meeting room where they would chew the rag over this little deal, and then they would get all their questions answered. Now, all the folks was a mite fractious being sucked up with the general into that there spaceship, so me and seeing Mr. Holmes was right smoothing and easing to their mind and all. Now, Mr. Holmes did the proper introduction of Admiral Hannibal Patton Coulter and his fiancée. Already seated at the table was Dalton, Devane, and Julian, and they was sure enough a sight for sore eyes too. Now Mr. Holmes turned the meeting over to Admiral Coulter, as he was called, and he began to tell them about what all they was into after taking questions from the group. Now here's some of them questions. Do y'all believe in God and Jesus? Now that's number one on everybody's mind there with the boys and the gals. Where is God in heaven? Do we all suppose to have the same Bible as the 574 other planets? Has ours been altered for hidden reasons? How many planets have life and what do they look like? Is there as many dimensions as there are universes? Do y'all travel through dimensions by a frequency as if changing a radio station? If so, is there a dimension code that is shared for traveling through them? What is the best way for people on Earth to detox and to stay ahead of pollution by what you know we are being bombarded with and shortening our lives? Why are we here? Well, good questions. I know y'all will have more later, but all in good time. I will explain as much as I can, and then let Julian and Mr. Holmes speak to y'all about the matter at hand. So folks, I'm going to start reading this, and you're going to say, Buster, where do you get this nonsense? Well folks, I told you all of my stories are based on truth. We know the people, have seen what they've showed us, have heard what they've told us. Hey, all I can tell you, it is what it is. You can believe it or not believe it or whatever. I can't confirm or deny. There's only one thing this old boy Buster can tell you. I live by two words, doing right. I believe in God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost. End of conversation. That's all I know to tell you. So, with that being said, I'm going to finish reading all this stuff that these folks told us. To begin with, there are many planets, but there is only one universe. It contains all that God has created, including all of the galaxies ad infinitum. There may be no end to God's creations and galaxies. No one that we know of has ever reached the end or edge of it, at least. As we travel through space, we stay in the same dimension that we're always in, which is the same one y'all live in. Many call this the third dimension, but there is no way to measure it, so this might as well be called the millionth dimension. We feel it is relative to our knowledge of God. Now they call this the Intergalactic Federation. The Federation feels that there is at least 24 dimensions, which are referenced in the books of knowledge concerning God. These are the Bibles, quote unquote, of many of the planets in our Federation of Planets, now consisting of 574 and one more that is currently in the admission stage to the Federation. When we warp time in our acceleration through many times the speed of light, we pass through an envelope where our spacecraft and bodies change in reference to a predetermined frequency that our bodies normally exhibit. That frequency is relative to our spiritual mind and relationship with our Creator. Some humans seem to exhibit a higher frequency than others. I was told that I was picked to be a part of the Federation because of the frequency range of my thoughts and prayer life. Now this is what this Admiral Coulter is telling us. Certain Federation researchers have an innate ability to monitor people and communicate via mind-to-mind transmission means. There is no equipment that can accomplish that. My precious fiancée, Karinka Kartal, who I call Karen, found me and started this communication process. I heard her talking to me via this method the first time I met her in person. Her IQ is so high that it is not measurable by our earthly standards. She speaks 57 languages fluently. She's taught me 3 of them, which are the native languages of a large percentage of the Federation planets. She speaks most of the major languages of planet Earth also. I sincerely hope y'all get to meet her someday. The majority of the 26,000 people that I command in Project Alliance have IQs of at least genius level, including some even of the normal staff of the Alliance spacecraft. All of my pilots and crew members have been handpicked and screened and have that intelligence level. The reason for that high intelligence level is because of the high oxygen content on their planets and on our spacecraft. They are completely vegetarian in their diet and do not consume the bacteria and diseases of animals since they eat no animal flesh. We feel that the early creation here on planet Earth also had that high intelligence level and lived extremely long lives because of the high oxygen content of the atmosphere and their consumption of a vegetarian diet. Now, Adam lived to be 930 years old, according to Genesis 5:5. When man started killing animals, consuming their flesh and diseases, his lifespan began to shorten. The oxygen content of the atmosphere also began to dissipate. Then he's going on to say, when we reach hyperspace speed, we bend time and reach a destination in a short period which would normally take many light years to accomplish. We do not change dimensions. When antimatter is created by the generators on our spacecraft, it produces a warp in time. We also use portals that some call stargates. When we obtain hyperspace speed inside a portal, which is a passageway in space from one point to another, we can traverse light years of distance in very short periods of time. These portals are frequency. Our spacecraft have the ability to lock on to these portal frequencies to enter them. All of them are different. There are no preset frequency codes because the frequencies of these portals are constantly changing. Our computers are able to ascertain the frequency as we approach a portal. We have millions of them mapped in space and know approximately where a portal starts and ends. We ride in that tunnel until we get close to our destination, and then we depart it and travel the remainder of the distance to our destination via antimatter propulsion systems, combined with the anti-gravity propulsion once we are in the troposphere of the planet, moon, etc. that we desire. The first time I traveled to another planet, I felt like my mind and body were separating. Fortunately, I had Karen with me with her arms around my waist talking to me. Now, the next trip wasn't that way. My mind had become attuned to the frequency change. The first trip was to Karen's home planet to meet and visit her family. What an awesome experience, and what a beautiful planet and beautiful people. I can now pilot the craft myself and accomplish such a flight. The 12 light years to her planet only took about 2.5 hours to accomplish. Most of that was in transitioning from the portal to normal space flight. He goes on to say, our overall purpose is to love the Lord with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our fellow man as we love ourselves. All of the other commandments of God are based on these two principles. If these parameters prevail, there will be no wars, no murder, no stealing, no cheating, no crime, no divorces, no child abuse, no adultery or promiscuity, no homosexual promiscuity, no rape, and no greed. The United Galactic Federation is set up on these principles, and it works. There is peace on all of our 574 planets and no need for militaries except for defense of our planets from outside invasion by hostile civilizations from those planets that have not learned these principles. Everything revolves around the spiritual character of man. When a person is submitted to the Holy Spirit of God and is led by Him, there is peace and harmony. Now, Jesus came to all our planets and taught these principles. The people who were born again are the ones that follow and begin to follow these laws. Jesus has been to all of the 574 planets and preached and taught the principles of the kingdom of God. Now, obviously, none of the planets were the same. He preached the same basic message, but also what was applicable to each planet. We don't have the same Bibles because the message was slightly different and there were different people involved. The Bible that we use is an accumulation of stories and facts that happened in that day and time. The basic message of our Bible has maintained itself throughout the centuries. Obviously, translation errors may have occurred because of the transition of languages, but the core of Jesus' teachings are still there. Our Old Testament is the history of the Israelite people together with the prophecies of future events, including the coming of Jesus to the planet. It may not be perfect, but it contains the essence of truth that is necessary to understand the laws of God. Well, the question about health and pollution. I am not an expert on these matters, but I have some doctors on my staff who are. I will seek their counsel and try to pass on what they recommend. The Federation is a spiritual and scientific governing body for the planets in our system. The stress clean living is to say the least, and they do that wholeheartedly, and healthy plants and herbs and pure water to keep our bodies cleansed and nourished. I personally take a large assortment of vitamins, minerals, and herbal products in addition to a healthy regimen of vegetables, fruits, nuts, and berries. Some of the supplements I take I have been recommended by our medical staff, and others are the results of research that I have personally done. I will get back to you on that as soon as I can, he told the boys and gals. Now I will tell you about our interaction on Earth and what is transpiring here. I took it upon myself to accomplish something that should have been done a long time ago. I had hoped that it would not get captured on film, but as you can see, it was filmed. And folks, this is right there on the YouTube, and people did it, and they were right there when they filmed this. The video shown on TV and on the internet was correct. I had forewarned 2 government officials in Israel, whom I trust, so they could be prepared in case we failed. There has been a doomsday device, nuclear, planted under the edifice that houses the Dome of the Rock. It had been placed there about 15 years ago by Muslim forces in the event that Israel ever decided to claim the territory and take it away from the Muslim powers. It was a suicide bomb that would have destroyed most of Jerusalem and the surrounding country. It should have been disarmed several years ago, but no one ventured to do it. Now, several of my crews had volunteered to do the dirty work, but it was quite twitchy and risky, even with our advanced electronic equipment. I decided to do it myself with the help of David, my co-pilot, and no other crew members at his insistence. If the bomb had exploded, we would have been history, but we trained on the equipment for several weeks to make sure we know the correct procedures, which were many. I kept all other craft away except for some backup drone crafts, which were the red lights that were seen on the YouTube and the TV. I will not explain their purpose for reasons of security. Well, as we disarmed the bomb electronically, the flash of light that was seen was the frying of the firing mechanism and the arcing of electrical panels. I got out of there in a hurry and put the pedal to the metal. We were several thousand miles away in seconds. David and I were both sweating profusely. Our squadron was awaiting at a rendezvous point, and we proceeded to the Alliance, which is in orbit around Saturn. Well, we had a celebration with all of our crews upon arrival. Israeli forces immediately stormed the dome and captured the device. There was no resistance. It was hushed up to prevent another war. I surely do not want to start a Middle Eastern war. Now, a few weeks ago, 23 of my crews and I disarmed 23 suitcase nukes that were hidden in this country in various locations. Unfortunately, we had to eliminate over 100 people in that operation. They had planned to explode them remotely, all at the same time. But they were much simpler to defuse. We captured the devices and transported them to an uninhabited planet and hid them. We did not want to risk the handling of the nuclear material and the contamination. I advised the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs after we had finished our task. They was extremely grateful. They were shocked to learn that all of the perpetrators we eliminated were Israeli Mossad agents. They sent in Delta Force to clean up the mess. There were no bodies, only dust and a few articles of clothing and weapons left, and the electronic equipment and communication devices that they left in the locations. I am sure there are some very angry Illuminati devils that are fuming. Oh boy, the Illuminati again. Our next move needs to target some of them. I am still praying about how to handle that problem. The elders left it to my discretion. That's the elders of Hendron at the planet. I had never intended to get this involved in the affairs of the planet, but I cannot sit by and watch the destruction of our nation and planet. I warned Mr. Obama a few days after he took office that we would not tolerate the destruction of this republic. He has refused to listen. I had already remotely viewed the plan to kill me when my intel group found out about it. My life is already in jeopardy, so que sera, sera. My security team caught 2 more assassins with sniper rifles in the woods behind my house last week. Fortunately, they no longer exist. Well, I'm sure there will be other attempts. I looked at the bullet scar on the oak tree in my backyard yesterday, and that happened last winter. I've been over to pick up a leaf rake, and just as they fired, the bullet missed my hay approximately only by 6 inches or so. Karen was beside me. I knocked her to the ground and fell on top of her. My security team had observed the late model Cadillac go down the road in front of my house, but had no reason to suspect it. The hit team abruptly stopped past my house and took the shot when they saw us in the backyard. The security craft melted that car into a block of molten steel with the men inside. I transported it to the White House the next morning and dropped it on the front steps. I am sure it cracked the steps and sidewalk. I had taped a note addressed to Mr. Obama to it saying, "Nice try, next time it could happen to your car." There was no response. Now folks, in these pictures and things I got, I tell you, that they sent me, I got the picture of that car. That blob that they've melted up all together, men and all. So you can believe it or not believe it, but that's what they sent to me. Whether it's true or not, I wasn't there. Things are busy. I have been working round the clock to stop the attacks. We took out 2 threats today. We have some others on the run. This is a large operation. Only time will tell. Looks like we have them running scared. Just keep praying we can stop it completely. Many government officials are involved. We have exposed 3 this week. They will not be able to do anything else. Now I hope this answered a few questions. It may still seem confusing, but there will be a day when it is common knowledge. If you have other questions, please feel free to ask. Admiral Coulter said, I now ask Julian and Mr. Holmes to explain further about why y'all are here. Well, Mr. Holmes told all the boys that they knowed it wasn't over with the Illuminati, and that's the reason they was here. Their lives and the lives of all on Earth are at stake. There's only a handful of folks that was ever privy to know about Admiral Coulter and what all they was a-seeing and hearing. Well, Julian is going to get more into it right now. The hair is going to stand right up on your heads, I'm a-telling you. Well, Julian said that last summer Admiral Coulter showed the pictures of the Crow Creek petroglyph panel to one of his Native American friends, who then told him this was extremely sacred ground and indicated a powerful interdimensional portal was located in the vicinity. Well, yesterday, Admiral Coulter informed me that the Crow Creek property, that's owned by the boys, Walter and Buster primarily, with this confluence of fault and ley lines, was where a massive interdimensional portal allowed a sort of intergalactic open door to this planet. Now, this is apparently where the malevolent spacecraft was intercepted and destroyed in the early morning hours. Now, alien spacecraft exist, and they engage in battle, and they use quantum physics-based portals to enter and exit the planet's atmosphere. Well, Admiral Coulter interjected that Madarfa is a planet that is 38 light years from Earth. They are human but not benevolent. They're men under snake. They have only recently, within the past 2 years, begun to explore this solar system. The Venusian people said they had several conflicts with them. They run from our craft when they see us coming. We've been watching their activities for about the last year. They are not very aggressive, so I wouldn't worry about them. My question is, what are the U.S. crafts looking for? I will find out through some of my Pentagon contacts eventually. 2 of my squadrons have sighted other spacecraft in the area on 4 occasions within the past 3 weeks. The other spacecraft consisted of about 12 gray-type craft parked in and around the picnic area, 2 reptilian craft, 6 Madarfa craft, and 3 U.S. piloted saucers. All of them was prowling around the dig site. We give chase to all of them, and they ran like scalded dogs. They they all seem to know that we are the big dogs in the galaxy. I flew over the site last week around 2 a.m. Central Time and encountered the 6 Modarfa craft. 2 of the craft was on the ground at the site, and the other 4 was keeping airborne watch. I shot 2 bursts near the craft on the ground, and they went bananas. They was running around on the ground like maniacs trying to get back to their vehicles. Well, folks, what I'm going to tell you, if you remember about Crow Creek, all that digging going up there and looking and trying to find stuff and the strange things we talked about, I tell you, it'd fry your brain. Now, that's all true. Got the clocks running backwards and the GPS off of a mile and a half and the cameras don't work and on and on. And in an hour's time, you have every kind of seasonal condition there is: hail, snow, sleet, sunshine, rain, all in an hour's time. Dangest thing you ever seen. Lights are shining and stuff. A true fact was, out there outside of Crow Creek, there's a lake. I believe it's called Bottle Lake. And a fella that worked for us, old Jeff Houston, and the deputy sheriff and some more folks living around there, seen this flying saucer come up out the lake, sit there, go up, take off, come back, and go back in that lake. And they called everybody and his brother. The deputy sheriff was a-calling, the people was a-calling, right there around Vernal, Utah. So don't say it wasn't ever saw, because it was seen right there. Back to the story. The 4 airborne craft took off and left the other 2 behind. The 2 on the ground took off at the last time I seen them. They was going underground in the Ural Mountains in Russia. I shot across their bows a couple of times, and as they was descending, I guess they thought they was going to die or something. They was really getting it. We was all laughing so hard it was difficult to fly my craft as it flies by comprehending my mental patterns, attitude, and emotions. I guess the craft thought I was crazy. So that is the action we have seen lately. Now, 3 weeks ago, one of my squadrons encountered 4 unfamiliar craft over the picnic area. That's what we called it over there. They was not gray or reptilian craft and appeared to be humans flying them. We communicated with them, and they replied that they was just exploring the area. They had seen the excavation and were just curious as to the nature of the work going on there. We are not sure they were telling the truth, but there ain't much of any way to know that. They was from a planet in the quadrant 4 of this galaxy, and we're checking them out now for more details, but they wasn't hostile. Well, Julian told the group after that, when y'all bought Crow Creek on my suggestion, Walter spent a considerable amount of time in exploration of the power source. That's the blue we're talking about. That source of power that my people have known for about thousands of years can heal or destroy. It can be the greatest benefit to mankind since the creation of Earth, but it can also be where it can eliminate mankind as well. Well, when that began, not only the powers in the U.S., the world, and the Illuminati, but the universe took notice. Now, the Illuminati have made a pact with planets that want to destroy or rule Earth. And that's where Mr. Holmes and Admiral Coulter come in, as well as our clan. The conversation between Mr. Holmes, Admiral Coulter, and myself concerned the report that the Admiral gave us. Well, we got this report here, and it's kind of long, but I think we need to read it all, so I'm just going to get to reading. Well, let me just check something there. Y'all don't get excitable. Let me see if I really do want to read it. I think we probably got it, but it's lengthy, but it's pretty good stuff now. Since we're into all this stuff, I know it. Hair lip of ugly eight. You just think I'm crazier than a loon, but I'm telling you, it is as follows. Last night was quite interesting. I departed this location around 0010 hours Central Time. Had a few places to observe in North America before going into space. I flew west toward the picnic area about 01:15 a.m. Central Time. I always approach the area slowly. In order to observe any activity in that area, at approximately 20 miles from the area, we began to see lightning over the site. It appeared that the lightning bolts was between 100 and 200 feet long, and there was hundreds of bolts constantly appearing. We then sensed another large spacecraft over the site. It was cloaked at first, but as we approached it uncloaked, and we observed a large craft that was rectangular in shape. It was approximately 1,000 feet long and 500 feet wide. It was hovering over the site. Well, our computers then began to receive a coded message in an ancient language that our computers interpreted into English for my advantage. The message stated, "We mean no harm. Please do not try to stop what we're doing. We only came to reclaim equipment that we left here many of your centuries ago. We at one time inhabited this land. We are from the Andromeda Galaxy and a planet we call Gabron. We will not damage this land. We will depart peacefully when we're finished." Well, I immediately sent a message back to them stating we will not harm or attack you. This land belonged to some friends of mine and I keep watch over it. We have sensed for several months of our time that there was something of value below the surface. It appears you now are reclaiming that item. We will only stand aside and observe what y'all are doing. We will not interfere. We then observed a large trunk-like object that was approximately 30 feet long and 10 foot wide come up out of the dirt and gradually float towards their spacecraft. There was obviously some type of transporter beam in use. The object was glowing a bright red color. We detected electromagnetic pulses coming from it. It appeared inside a large door that opened on the bottom of the spacecraft. The spacecraft slowly began to ascend. Go up there. While they was ascending, they transmitted another message. They stated, "We appreciate your cooperation. Y'all are welcome in our galaxy and on our planet at any time y'all wish to visit. We are a peaceful and godly civilization that cares about all of our fellow mankind. We are fully human and look much like the Indian people that inhabit the western part of this continent. We are familiar with your federation and our blessings are with y'all in what you're attempting to do. We have observed your activities and listened to your communications for many of the years y'all have been working with this planet. May God's grace continue to dwell with y'all." They then began to accelerate and quickly disappeared in a flash of light. Well, I then flew over the picnic area and observed that there seemed to be no damage or disturbance of the dirt or holes that y'all dug this summer. The lightning bolts had disappeared and apparently was a result of the transporter beam they was using. We departed the area and proceeded to the Alliance. End of report. Boy, isn't that a doozy, the boy said. Well, Julian then asked if the Admiral had any other comments, and he said he had a little more information for him, and then went on to say, "Just after midnight on November the 18th, the entire state of Utah was lit up to the point of actually making the midnight sky blue. Further investigation into the events of November the 18th showed that the noctilucent vapor trails, typical of either a rocket launch or a crashing aircraft, was centered directly overhead the Crow Creek property. Quite high into space, however. We have not seen any more activity at the picnic area since last week. We will continue to monitor." Well, Julian also recounted a report on an unexpected water source while Walter was completing his exploratory excavations. And Admiral Coulter's report read, "I'm so sorry it took so long to get this information back to you, but many circumstances prevented its expeditious evaluation. The number one problem was the distance to our laboratory that we decided to use. 43 light years is a long way. We only have vehicles traversing the distance to that planet occasionally. However, their analysis methods are the best in the galaxy. They use light spectrum, chemical, sound, and nuclear methods to determine the composition of anything they evaluate. Our other labs do similar studies, but the equipment on planet Gimbal is the most advanced of all of our member planets. Hence, I felt I should take the extra time to get the best look at our samples. Another problem I faced was translation of the information to the English language. Our scientists on Gimbal submitted the report in their native language, which is a very difficult language to translate. Only 2 of my staff speaks and comprehends the language. One of those was on leave for a family death, and the other was on an assigned project that I'd sent him on in October. So we had to wait until they both returned to assure correct translation. Well, after all of those excuses, I again apologize and submit these results. I believe the cesium-137 and plutonium are residual from the fallout and are only surface related. The aquifer is much deeper than your digging, so I doubt that the underground water flow would be contaminated. The report from the Gimbal scientists showed only residual, and the contamination was minute. I had sent a request to them asking for their opinion about some buried alien artifact. Their response was that there was a possible nuclear power source related to the site. I agree that the electrical display was only relevant to the site and not the surrounding area. We used a Geiger counter type instrument to see if there was possible danger. Our reading showed none. So a rubber suit would not be necessary. I presume the Greys were trying to find the danger too. The interest in the site means that the other alien groups know something is there. They have probably observed the electrical display also. Well, then Mr. Holmes then took over the meeting and related the following. An academic paper written for the Air Force in the mid-1990s mentions the idea of a weapon that would use sound waves to send words into a person's head. The signal can be a message from God that can warn the enemy of impending doom or encourage the enemy to surrender. In 2002, the Air Force Research Laboratory patented precisely such a technology, using microwaves to send words into someone's head. The patent was based on human experimentation in October of 1994 at the Air Force lab, where scientists were able to transmit phrases into the heads of human subjects. That's Washington Post article on electronic harassment, Voices in the Head, 11407. Told you folks, it's true stuff here. What all of this means is that we are under a serious attack. Not just threats, but alienation is their purpose. You boys and anyone associated with you are primary targets. Well, now Dalton and Devane have been briefed long ago on all this carrying on, and we got to do something about all this. Your new plane, the General, is going to get some more upgrades whilst y'all are guests of Admiral Coulter. I'd like to speak to Miss Sheena Marie and then Bulldog and Butch. The rest of you can gom around with the crew or get something to eat. Ain't no steak though, Walter, for you and Buster. No beef, vegetarians, you know. Well, Julian stopped the boys before they dispersed and told them he had a message for them. Black Kettle, that's Murado, you know, said to tell them to live well and die well. They was dog soldiers. Well, then Julian proceeded to give them each their belt. Now that got the boys' eyes to popping and googled out. They didn't have their belts with them. Of course, nothing surprised the boys anymore. Mr. Holmes sat down with Sheena Marie and had a heart-to-heart talk with her. He told her the seriousness of what was happening and of the danger. She had to make a decision whether or not to stay or go. Well, Mr. Holmes said him and the United Galactic Federation needed her. She had been chosen, but it was her decision. Wow. Well, next Bulldog and Butch had them a little settee with Mr. Holmes. After all was said and done, Mr. Holmes called everybody together. Mr. Holmes asked if anybody wanted to leave, but not a hand went up. He said if and you do, there would be no hard feelings and one of the crew would take them back, but they would be unable to remember what all they seed or heard on the spaceship. He then went on to say that the U.S. government had known of other life on planets for years but didn't let on to the public. Now that all that information was in the wrong hands and the Illuminati got in the mix with the bad eggs of the alien world and the fat was in the fire. His job, along with the others, was to see the safety of the world, let alone the U.S. of A. All the group elected to stay and committed to helping out. Well, seeing how everybody is staying, said Mr. Holmes, let's get to a cracking. We got a wedding to go to. Well, Butch and Miss Sheena Marie was both grinning from ear to ear. Admiral Coulter asked if he could give away the bride, and Sheena Marie said she'd be honored. Then Mr. Holmes give Butch a ring that was nothing like anybody had ever seen now. It wasn't too big or too little, but just right for her finger. A matching band for Butch was given to Sheena Marie for him. Well, Mr. Holmes said this was a momentous occasion. This was the first wedding in space. Well, Admiral Coulter and Karen had handpicked the rings out from a planet in their solar system. The stone was like no other on Earth, and the metal for the bands was from her planet. Well, after the wedding, Julian and Mr. Holmes said they had to leave them, but Dalton and Devane would be staying with them. Their adventure had not begun those years ago. That was just a prelude. Now was the time to go where no man has gone before. Admiral Coulter then said, "Engage," and he winked at the boys and said to them, "Where do you think Star Trek got that from?" Well, folks, y'all have a blessed day, and take all this with a grain of salt, and if any of it you want to check on out, I'll be glad to send you all that information I got for Buster and the Boys at yahoo.com. This old Buster signing out to you. Again, have a blessed day. Bye now.